This is my second video lesson for Unit 6B. In this lesson, we'll be talking about the mole. So go to page 5 in the class packet. Motivation. Complete the table. Here I have a bunch of counting units. What is the value of each of those units? So a dozen is 12. A baker dozen is 13. A gross is 144. A couple is 2. A ton is 2,000. A pair is 2. If you recall from Unit 2, mole is 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd. Learning target. At the end of the lesson, I'll be able to convert between moles, atoms, and molecules. Homework will be number 2, which is a junipod based off this lesson. So a mole is a counting unit used to express the amount of chemical substances, such as atoms, ions, molecules, compounds, and electrons. The mole is also known as Avogadro's number. The value of the mole is 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd. So you have to memorize this number for the regions. Now I want you to pause this video to watch a video about the mole. The link to the video will be in the descriptions. Once you watch the video, resume this one. The value of the mole is represented using scientific notation because if you were to write out the standard notation, it's a big number with 23 decimal places. So it's much easier to use a scientific notation for calculation purposes. Now we're going to review unit conversion using the mole. So this was the unit conversion equation. Start unit times desire over start gives us desire. Desire over start is our conversion factor. There's two conversion factors regarding the mole. Here are the two conversion factors. So you can use either one depending on what you're converting. Let's look at a simple example first to review using the equation. We want to convert 3 dozen apples to the number of apples. The start will be 3 dozen apples. We know 1 dozen is 12. So here are two conversion factors. Either it's 12 over 1 dozen or 1 dozen over 12. To figure out which one to use, you look at our start unit. Since our start unit is a dozen, you want to use a conversion factor with dozen in the denominator, so that the dozen will cancel out when you multiply. So 3 times 12 is 36. So 3 dozen apples is 36 apples. In the next example, we're going to convert 1 mole of apples to the number of apples. So we're given 1 mole of apples. How many apples is that? We know 1 mole is 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd. So there's two conversion factors. So since we are given mole, we want the mole to be in the denominator. So if we're given mole, we're going to use this conversion factor, but if we're given the number of items, we're going to use this one. Notice when we multiply by the conversion factor, the unit mole cancels out. So 1 apple times 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd is 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd apples. So that's how much 1 mole of apples is. Learning check number 1, convert 3 moles of apples to number of apples. Pause the video and resume once completed. So the answer is choice 2. So we're given 3 moles of apples and we want to convert the number of apples. So we want to use a conversion factor with moles in the denominator. So that'll be this one. So when we multiply them and we use a calculator, the moles will cancel out and we get 1.8 times 10 to the 24 apples. Learning check number 2, convert 1.204 times 10 to the 23rd apples to number of moles. Pause the video and resume once completed. So the answer is choice 4. We're given 1.204 times 10 to the 23rd apples and we want the number of moles. So we need to choose a conversion factor that has the number of items in the denominator. That'll be this one over here. So when we multiply them, we get 0.2 moles of apples. Now we're going to practice counting atoms and molecules. Let's say we have 1 mole of H2O. How many moles of atoms, number of molecules, and the number of atoms are present in 1 mole of H2O? So to help you complete this table, we're going to answer a couple of questions. Check of understanding number 1. How many atoms are in 1 molecule of H2O? If you look at the chemical formula, there are 3 atoms, 2 hydrogens, and 1 oxygen. Check understanding number 2. How many moles of atoms if you have 1 mole of H2O? Question number 2 is different from question number 1. Question number 1 is asking about the number of atoms, while question number 2 is asking about how many moles of atoms. So they're not exactly the same. They are different units. So how many moles of atoms are in 1 mole of H2O? There are 3 moles of atoms. To help you understand this, let's look at an analogy. If one apple has 10 seeds, 1 dozen of apples will have how many dozens of seeds? So we know 1 dozen apples is 12. There are 12 apples. Since each apple has 10 seeds, there's a total of 120 seeds. So that is how many dozens of seeds? That is 10 dozen seeds. So now let's fill in this table. We have 3 moles of atoms. So how many moles of oxygen atoms are present in 1 mole of H2O? Since the number of water and oxygen are 1 to 1, there is 1 mole of oxygen atoms. For hydrogen atoms, since the ratio between water and hydrogen is 1 molecule has 2 hydrogens, so there'll be 2 moles of hydrogen atoms. Notice if we add up the moles of oxygen and hydrogen, they add up to the total, which is 3. How many molecules are present in 1 mole of H2O? Since 1 mole is 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd, the number of molecules will be 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd water molecules. How many atoms are present? Since 1 molecule of H2O is 3 atoms, we multiply this number by 3. Oxygen and H2O are in a 1-to-1 ratio. 1 molecule of water has 1 oxygen atom. So therefore, it will have 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd oxygen atoms. For hydrogen, we have double the amount of hydrogen compared to oxygen. So when we double this number, we get 1.2 times 10 to the 24. Notice if we add up the oxygen atoms and the hydrogen atoms, we get the total. Notice we can get the number of atoms from the moles of atoms if we multiply by 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd. So to help you visualize the calculations, to go from moles of molecules to moles of atoms, you multiply it by the subscript present in the chemical formula. To go from moles of molecules to number of molecules, you multiply by 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd. To go from moles of atoms to number of atoms, you multiply by 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd. To go from number of molecules to the moles of molecules, you divide by 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd. To go from number of atoms to moles of atoms, you divide by 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd. To go from moles of atoms to moles of molecules, you divide by the subscript in the chemical formula. Learning check number 3. What's the total number of moles of oxygen atoms in 1 mole of N2O3? Pause the video and resume once completed. So as you can see from the chemical formula, we have 3 oxygens in 1 molecule of N2O3, so the answer is 3. Learning check number 4. Which sample contains a total of 9 times 10 to the 23rd atoms? Pause the video and resume once completed. To figure this out, let's count the number of atoms. So in the first one, we have 0.5 moles of the molecule HCl. HCl has 2 atoms, so to figure out the number of moles of atoms is 2 times 0.5, that's 1 mole of atoms. So 1 mole is 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd, so choice 1 is wrong. In the second one, we have 0.75 mole of the molecule H2O, which has 3 atoms. So how many moles of atoms there are? Is 3 times 0.75, that is 2.25 mole. How many atoms is 2.25 moles? We multiply this by 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd is 1.35 times 10 to the 24th atoms. So choice 2 is wrong. For number 3, 1.5 moles of copper is how many moles? In the chemical formula, there's only one element, so 1.5 times 1 is 1.5 moles of atoms. So how many atoms are there? So 1.5 times 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd is 9 times 10 to the 23rd. So the answer is choice 3. Let's check choice 4 to be sure. So we have 1.5 moles of H2. In one molecule of H2, there are 2 atoms. So that's 3 moles of atoms. So that is double the amount of atoms in choice 3. Learning check number 5. What is the total number of atoms in 1 mole of CO2? Pause the video and resume once completed. One molecule of CO2 have 3 atoms. So there's a total of 3 moles of atoms. To figure out the number of atoms, we do 3 times 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd. We get choice 4. 18 times 10 to the 23rd. Now I want you to finish the rest of the table on page 5. In the first one, you're given 2.5 moles of H2O. In the second one, you're given the number of atoms. And the third one, you're given the number of molecules. Pause the video and resume once you complete the table. Here are the answers. On page 6 of your packet, there's more practice. Pause the video and resume once you want to see the answers. So the answers on the next slide. So this concludes the video lesson for today. Remember to do the Junipod homework.